Hey, this is Jordan Belfort, the real Wolf of Wall Street, and you're listening to the Anthony Rogers Show.
Welcome back to the greatest show in the universe. Today we have a guest who his intellect's out of my league in this subject. And I think you'll be able to tell from the beginning of it. His name is Mark Schneider, and he's the president of Gen for Nuclear. And we're going to talk some issues of nuclear energy and stuff like that. And so, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me. It's awesome to be on. And I think you and I were discussing a little bit. I've got some family that actually lives out in the Missouri area, and hopefully they'll be voting for you in the next couple of days.
I hope so, man. Are you from Missouri, or where are you at right now?
I live in Virginia, but I grew up in Oregon.
Nice,
so
nice.
I'm across the nation there.
That's nice, man. And you have some subject matter that I'm interested in, but after a couple beers in, I'm not that with it. So I'm gonna let you just take it on like energy, I guess. What are your thoughts on just nuclear energy replacing most energy? Is it cleaner? Is it what are you thinking?
Yeah, so nuclear energy, and it's a carbon-free form of energy. That's probably the biggest thing that people don't understand is that they've been lied to by Greenpeace, is one of the major companies, and they've actually been lied to by the fossil fuel industry. So they've got both the left wing and the right wing kind of lying about what nuclear is. Nuclear produces no carbon to actually generate electricity. It's through literally breaking atoms apart. Lots of energy is produced, right? I've got my coffee mug here. If I mined uranium, a coffee mug's worth of uranium would power your life for a year carbon-free energy in a traditional light water reactor. If I put it in an advanced generation 4 reactor, it would power 100 people's lives in one coffee mug of uranium, right? So we're talking hugely dense amount of power. I was just looking at some of the overhead maps of some of the power stations, and most power stations have like a combustion turbine and these giant 2 million gallon tanks of fuel, right? That tank of fuel is the size of the nuclear reactor. You might have 300 megawatts of, say, of combustion turbine. So that's using like oil and natural gas to power it. And you'll have a reactor that's the same size that produces almost 3 times that amount of power as that tank, right? Just the tank itself. And you got a reactor in there with all the components. So you have very concentrated power in this very, very small, dense area. The fact is that 20% of electricity in the US is generated via nuclear energy. Right, it is the safest form of energy, even with the accidents. Right, with the accidents that have happened, around, the U.S., it is still the safest, and around the planet. Everyone wants to talk about Chernobyl. They want to talk about Fukushima. They want to talk about 3 Mile Island. Yes, those accidents were terrible. We would never want those to occur again. And if you actually look at what the industry has done, they've made it to where you can't have those accidents anymore. I'm going to backpedal that a little bit. The Russians are shutting down the last of the RBMK reactor that's the same design as Chernobyl. If they underwent that same test with those same comedy of errors, could that occur? Maybe. I don't think they ever would get in that situation. But a U.S. reactor can't undergo what that design did. Just the physics don't work, right? So then you go to the Fukushima event, right? So Fukushima, they had a tsunami, wiped out all their emergency systems, and they lost their ability to keep the reactor cool. After the Fukushima event, we installed a system in all the plants in the US called the BDB Flex, stands for Beyond Design Basis. So there's all this external equipment that is housed in bunkers that we can then turn around, hook up to the reactor to keep it cool so you can't have a Fukushima event. And that's assuming that we didn't have what's called the station blackout diesels. They were installed on all the reactors back in the 90s. Japan didn't have those. But we installed this system that would have prevented a Fukushima event. So let's say that, Diablo Canyon reactor down in California, when let's say, that earthquake had occurred off the coast of California, tsunami came in and washed out their emergency systems, the same equivalent ones that would be on that reactor. They had this extra system that the United States demanded that we install in the 1990s that would have kept power to keep the reactor cool. Right. So I know I'm talking a lot of things. So if you have questions, please interject Tell me if I'm talking too much because
No,
I
it's
can talk
great.
all day long about this stuff.
No, it's a great point.
So,
Like, what do we do about the waste aspect of it? Like, where is that an easy resolve? Like, what are some downsides? I know it is clean. It does a lot of stuff. Like, what are some cons on that? Like, why wouldn't we be
yeah,
doing this more?
so the waste is a management challenge. I don't want to say call it a problem. I call it a challenge, right? So if you go in and and if any of your listeners or followers, if you just look up a nuclear power plant and like go on your map site, I'll just say I'll use an example: North Anna Power Station. It's in Northern Virginia, and if you zoom in, you'll see this series of little circles, and that's their the nuclear fuel, spent nuclear fuel. That's the waste, and that's 40 years of waste sitting on this site, and it takes up less than an acre. 40 years of power, large scale power station. That's its waste. Now, in our current design reactors, use a thermal reactor, right? So thermal reactor, it's based on the energy of the neutrons. Neutrons, when the nuclear reaction occurs, they create a bunch of neutrons, and they start at high energies. We call them fast, and then the energy drops down and we become thermal, and that's the type of reactors we use. Create a large quantity of waste, but if we used a fast reactor, we could actually consume our waste as fuel. And we know how to do this, and we've done this in the past. In early on in the 1960s, we did this, and the Russians are actually doing this today. There's a reactor called the BN-800. It was initially powered off of plutonium from nuclear weapons, so you can burn up your nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons material is gone forever. And then it's being powered right now. It's transitioning from this original weapons material into waste. And by 2022, it will be purely powered off of nuclear waste. So we only use about 5% of the energy in our fuel, and we can actually then extract the other 95%. In the US right now, if we use our weapons, our waste, and then depleted uranium, which is like tank armor and bullets, stuff like that, we could actually power the US without mining anything for about 10,000 years.
That's pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting. That's a long time.
Yeah, it is. Well, and then what else is fascinating is that they're working on something called the anneal fuel. It's this blended fuel. Like right now, we only use uranium as our fuel, but they're talking about designing this new blended fuel where they can actually put thorium blended with it, and you can install it in current reactors. And right now, reactor fuel lasts about 4.5 to 6 years, right? So we refuel them about every 18 months, right? So when I put fuel in a reactor, it lasts for 4.5 years because we take it out in thirds at a time. If I use this new anneal fuel, it could last upwards of 20 years. So because of just the difference of the way thorium works compared to uranium, we have a better burn-up rate of it. So you'd end up with basically, we could use the existing reactors we have now and produce 1/8 the waste. So, we could, basically upgrade all of our reactors. So it's kind of an interesting, fascinating thing what we can do with nuclear energy, with existing nuclear. And that doesn't even include when we get into advanced generation reactors, new reactors coming online, small modular reactors, what we can do. The industry is actually, about to make giant leaps forward.
That's interesting. Well, the only reason like this isn't like going right now is because like it's more, you make more money off of like selling people like this old power grid system that we have. Or like, what would you think of why are the reasons? What's holding us back from being like covered on this? Or
yeah, so one of the big problems with the industry crippled itself in a lot of ways, and we allowed outside influences to cripple us as well. We're radically overregulated. If you went to a coal plant, they don't even have a simulator, right? Like, so your main control room is what controls how the plant operates. They don't need a simulator, right? But a nuclear power plant needs a simulator because, and for good reason, right? We are, when accidents go bad, they do go really bad. I think the governments go way too extreme when dealing with them. And we could talk about that in a little bit, talk about the Fukushima and Chernobyl accidents. But the fact is that, we have radical overregulations. Plants have been fined because the stapler in the control room was a different color than the stapler in the actual, or the simulator, right? So it's a stapler. Does it matter if one is red and one is black? No, it's irrelevant. Doesn't change the way you would operate, the simulator versus the actual plant, but for some reason we've allowed ourselves to be radically overregulated. And then we have layers of regulations on top of it. So we have the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which is overall in charge of regulatory oversight. The industry funds an organization called the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations. So every utility that has reactors provides money to this organization, and they go around and they grade all the reactors, right? So they're paying money to go have people from other plants come and tell you how bad you suck, right? And then on top of it, you have your own people that are going to go do that to other plants, but they got to get, they got to keep that ability to go tell the other plants how much they suck. So they go tell their operators how much they suck all the time, right? So as an organization, we're basically told from the US government all the way down that we just suck. We're really bad at what we do, even though when you look at nuclear as a whole, our reactors are remaining online longer, less incidents, less issues, the highest safety performance of all energy in the US, but we still get told how bad we are all the time. It's fascinating how that dichotomy that exists in the industry.
That's interesting. Tell me about your company a little bit too. Like, what does your company do?
So I'm a nuclear power advocacy company. My day job, I actually work at a power plant. And so, I try to promote nuclear power and specifically advanced generation reactor designs, right? One of the things is that we got to get into the future with, nuclear. The old school, large scale reactors, as much as they're a great way of doing power, if we miniaturize these things and make it a more local system, it's a better way of doing it. If I could build a reactor that could go in the basement of a skyscraper that powers that skyscraper and say maybe the adjacent buildings, right? That's a much more efficient way of using our energy, as opposed to having a reactor that's, 30 miles away that we have to transmit all that power across, have to have, high voltage lines, right? There's all those losses, it's less efficient when we do that. So that's one of the things, is going to these advanced reactors. And there's some really cool things, like, at the debate recently, we saw that, between Biden and Trump, Biden's like, we're going to shut down coal or oil and gas. And, I'm the nuclear guy, right? So you'd think I'd be in complete odds with those. Well, there's actually designs where it's a combined cycle of nuclear and gas turbine engine, right? Where I would use the nuclear for your major source of heat, and then I would superheat the steam using natural gas to just super drive it. So I have this super efficient turbine, right? And while you're building, you'd actually start with the natural gas turbine, because nuclear takes a long time to build, but I could start with a natural gas boiler or superheater. And I'd start off with that, and I could get my plant up and running at a small amount of power. It may not be, like 1,000 megawatts. Say it's only 250 megawatts, but I start making money. That's one of the big problems of nuclear construction is if it takes 10, it takes 10 years to build. I'm, paying salaries, healthcare, paying for material for a decade, and I'm not getting any money coming in. But if I could, do this combined cycle where I start with the natural gas and I can get that thing up in, say, 2 years, now I'm making a small amount of money. It may just make enough to, cover my costs, but so long as I'm covering my costs while I'm building, and then I get the whole unit online, now I've got 1,000 megawatt unit, which is going to make about $1 million a day, right? Now I'm making, now I'm cooking with gas, if you will, in this case, cooking with gas and nuclear. So there's a pairing that could occur with the industries.
How much would it cost you to start this up? Like, how much would your idea cost to make $1 million a day? Like, what would that need, and like what money and stuff?
So when you come into a large scale reactor like that, typically costs about in the U.S. about $8 to $10 billion to get a reactor. Yeah, Trump change. Yeah, exactly. Now, when we talk about these small modular reactors, they're supposed to drop that cost anywhere from about to 20% to about 10% of that. So there's the Trump administration just this month announced that they're funding what's called the UAMPS. It's the Utah. It's a municipal power system. So in Idaho, it's funny, it's Utah, but it's actually going to be built in Idaho. So it's because they're neighboring states, but they're going to build a brand new. The reactor was just licensed a month ago. It's called the NuScale Power Module. So right now reactors in the US are somewhere between 500 and 1200 megawatts of power. That's a huge reactor. NewScale has said, I'm going to build a 60 megawatt reactor, but we're going to treat them like beer. We're going to get, you can buy them in 12, right? 12 packs, 6 packs, right? So you can go to your local, reactor store and pick these things up, like at the 7-Eleven. But it drops the cost down. So they've been funded with $1.4 billion to build 12 of these things. 12 of those are going to produce about 720 megawatts for the grid. That puts it into the large scale. But because I'm using the Henry Ford concept, right? Henry Ford said, hey, I can build a car that the average, American could buy, cost a month's salary. We're doing that with nuclear, where I just, build the same design reactor and just keep churning it out over and over again, but it's small. So I build it in a factory, ship it in, install it, and then operate it.
Interesting. Well, what makes it so expensive? Like, is there a way to cut costs, like on creating these things? Or I mean, clearly not safety things, but what costs so much? Well, I mean, billions of dollars is a lot of money. What costs so much on this?
So the big thing when it comes to the cost of a large scale reactor, right, is that they're all individual. So if you looked at, I can use 3 reactors that are all owned by the same company, Dominion, right? You look at North Anna, you look at Surrey Power Station, and then you look at VC Summer. Their design is a 3-loop Westinghouse. That's their design. They're identical designs, but they're all super unique to each other. So I can't take a guy that is licensed at North Anna and their license won't work at Surrey and their license won't work at VC Summer, right? We actually have reactor units that are even the same, where, they're in the same facility. And I believe this is true, so I may be wrong on this, but Palo Verde out in Arizona has 3 reactors that are all the same design. And each reactor has its own licensing requirements. So you have a guy that's licensed on unit 1 that can't operate units 2 or 3, right? So that aspect, so now you're talking, you have to have 3 separate training programs, you have to have 3 separate qualification programs. So that's part of the cost. Plus you have that each reactor is, uniquely designed and built. So there's no repeatability, right? So it's like the difference between building, a large scale home, right? Each home has its own thing, its own footprint, its own blueprint. Like I could compare North Anna. So North Anna's on a lake, right? And it uses a lake to cool it. And then Surrey Power Station is on a river, and it has a 1.6 mile long intake canal, right? Mm. So the pumps that pump the water into the reactor at North Anna, right up next to the power plant. The pumps that pump the water in the reactor at Surrey pump it up into an intake canal that then flows 1.5 miles away and then into the plant and then back out to the James River, right? So completely different. And they were built literally to be sister plants, right? So the same company that built, Surrey for its Virginia Electric Power Company was also going to build North Anna for Surrey Electric Power, for Virginia Electric Power Company. So they're so unique that they have their own requirements. That drives cost up. The other thing is, when you're talking large scale builds, is you don't have that with that lack of repetition, right? I build the foundation for the containment and then have to build the structure for the containment. So there's no way to kind of keep repeating that. And it's long scale repeating. The Navy struggles with this. I have quite a bit of experience with, I did 20 years in the Navy. And so, I worked on both submarines and aircraft carriers in their construction, actually. And submarines, the United States Navy is turning a submarine out every 6 months, right?
That's
there are
crazy.
nuclear powered. So this is nuclear powered, right?
Yeah.
So, and I've got USS Washington behind me. That was the 14th Virginia class submarine. 6 months later, the Colorado was commissioned, right? And then 6 months after, the next one and the next one. So every 6 months, because they've modularized the construction, they take about 5 years to build, but you've got all these reactors just stacked up. And so you just, I got one going, I've got, each different phase. And so I've got a welder that say, he builds the primary shield tank. That's his job, or this group of this team that builds the primary shield tank. And they build primary shield tank after primary shield tank after primary shield tank. And what's interesting about the Virginia class submarine program is that you have 2 shipyards that build, each one of them build about 40% of the submarine, and then ship those 40% to each other. So now you have 80% built, right? And then the delivery shipyard builds the final 20% to make it a whole submarine. So you've got the same thing. So and it comes up to 50-50, but let's say the bow sections are all built in Newport News, and then the reactor or the engine room sections are built in up an Electric Boat, and they just ship them down. So that way you've got this repeatability. The same workers are working on the same thing, whereas comparing that to the VC Summer project, which was shut down, AP1000 reactors, the same as the Vogtle project, you've got a group of people who've never built a reactor in Vogtle learning it for the first time, and a group of people in VC Summer that are building a reactor for the very first time that have no idea what they're doing, right? So you're making the same mistakes twice, whereas when you go to a modular style construction, you make the mistakes on the first one, and then you move on and you figure it out and you incorporate those, and then you get better and better.
Interesting, man. Like you got a lot of knowledge, man. Are those your degrees behind you, or?
So I have my bachelor's degree from Thomas Edison State University, and then my high school diploma. I just have my bachelor's degree, but
that's awesome.
That's really, cool. Yeah. So I do like talking about my degree because I spent $285 on it.
How'd you pull that off?
The United States Navy.
Nice.
Yeah. So my experience in the Navy, Thomas Edison State University does a great job of translating that. So the $200 is my graduation fee and one book for one class I took. So
that's awesome.
I took a bunch of exams, and I say there was more money that went into it, but the Navy paid for everything else. That was out of my pocket that I paid $285.
Still counts. No, it counts for you. I'd count that for sure. Yeah. That's great. That's awesome. And I love tricks like that. Like where you just it's basic economics, like the least amount of money for the most amount, for the most you can get. It's very American. The return on interest return on investment.
What's fascinating, and this is not just a nuclear only thing, but I got the GI Bill while I was in the service, and there's certified apprenticeship programs. So when you say you get into being a welder or a police officer or a firefighter or a nuclear power plant operator, you go through a training program, and they may not pay you at the full pay scale. So the GI Bill can be utilized, assuming they're certified, to supplement your income. So you're consuming that college money education, and you're getting $1,500 a month for the first 6 months, $1,000 for the next, and then $500 a month for the remainder of your time, consuming something that you earned, right? It's not something that, it's not an entitlement, it's something you earned. You paid money into it. It was part of your contract, but you're getting paid so that, that way, let's say you want to go to a police academy, when you go to a police academy, you get paid less than an actual police officer, but now you'd be getting money on top of that. So it's just a fascinating program that military veterans get. That's
awesome, man. Before we talk forever, do you want to throw any social media or anything? And we'll have you on more again because give some interesting subjects that I had to listen because I feel like you're I was learning the whole time like a lot of time. I definitely like the subject matter there. And I think it's interesting for a potential solution. I'd like to look into it more and figure that out. I'd like to know way more about it like this. So it was definitely awesome.
Yeah, so I'm pretty active on Twitter. My handle is @subschneider, SUB, because I was on submarines, and then Schneider, SCHNEIDER. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm very open on my LinkedIn. You'll find two very different personalities, right? LinkedIn is a professional, so I'm typically very professional on LinkedIn. You won't get my Twitter, rah, 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 go Trump on there, because that's Twitter, right? Twitter's all about, I like to consider Twitter as, it's a bunch of people yelling in a room, and you got to yell louder than everyone else and say something funny so that people will notice you. So you can find me on there. I also have a website. It's gen4nuclear.com. That's gen, GEN is in generation, for the Roman numeral, IV, and the nuclear.com. There's some information on there. So yeah, I do love questions. My DMs on Twitter are open. I answer any questions on LinkedIn as well. So any of your followers, anyone has any questions, they can reach out to me. I try to respond. And a lot of times I won't necessarily have articles to back it up, because a lot of it is, I learned it from a technical manual while in the United States Navy. So I am the technical expert. So a lot of times I will answer the question because I don't necessarily have, the technical manual that had the confidential written on the top of it, sitting in a locker that had a lockup every day. So a lot of it's just based on 20 years of my experience. So I do try to use articles as much as I can to discuss things. I'm going to answer this question because I got to answer the question. I don't have a great book to discuss about nuclear energy because we suck at words as an industry. So no one has written a book that's good on nuclear energy, so I won't endorse any. So
that's great. Yeah, you can find all Mark's links. I'll just put all the links in the bottom of this YouTube video if you're watching the video, and if you're listening on streaming services, just either go to that YouTube and find it, or just go to the website he told you to, whatever. Thank you for listening. Thanks for coming on here, man. I appreciate it. It was great.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks so much, man.